Here's something different about the way that Western and Vedic astrologers approach Venus in Leo, both by transit, so what's happening currently in the skies between the 13th of June until the 9th of July, as well as if Venus is in Leo in your birth chart. And since Venus is currently transiting Leo, this is an opportunity for us to discuss the energies because we're going to feel into them a lot more strongly. And this video is going to be for you if you want to understand the current mood of the skies, but also if you have Venus in Leo in your birth chart, or you know somebody close to you who has that, and if you have significant placements in Leo. So say your sun is in Leo or you have a rising sign in Leo, then understanding what happens when Venus traverses this part of your chart is going to also help deepen the knowledge of your own birth chart. And as you can see, I have been changing my offering on this channel somewhat, moving away from just pure forecasts, mostly because that is something that I'm moving away from and going much deeper into my research into other fields. And I'm particularly interested in the intersection of Western and Vedic astrology. My name is Deborah Lina. I'm a professional astrologer. I do use different techniques, Western Vedic. I also use Persian techniques to delineate horoscopes, offer readings. So if you want a more nuanced view of your birth chart, either a birth chart reading, year ahead, relationship reading, please get in touch directly for that. And with that, let's begin by discussing exactly what is Venus in a birth chart. Venus as a planet represents many different things in our chart. At its very basic level, we know that it's usually associated with love and romance and relationships, and that is true. But it also has a lot to do with the way that we dress, so our aesthetic, our sense of beauty. It has to do with our creative pursuits, our artistic kind of sensibilities. And in addition to that, Venus will also represent material things, like it has to do with money. It has to do with things that we can touch and we feel and have luxuries around them. But in an even more specific way, when we start to drill down into your own chart, Venus can represent your father. It can have something to do with your property or your career. So today what we're going to be talking about is, of course, at a more general level, what Venus in Leo can represent as a feeling. But know that this can be applied to many different aspects of your life. And when we start to better understand how does this planet in this sign behave, we're starting to see, okay, Leo is this solar energy. It is this ray of light. And so with Venus and Leo, people have a natural magnetism to them, especially depending on where it's placed in the chart. This is not going to be the same thing for everyone. I will talk about what the differences are with the same Venus and Leo. But you start to see that people get this radiant energy, and because it has to do with your creative self-expression and a sense of confidence, people are attracted to that. We associate it with celebrities, with actors and actresses, artists, designers, models. They are people that are generally front and center. Not always, but that's definitely one of the characteristics of having Venus in Leo. And in addition to that, it's really great for creative work, for artistic pursuits. I know a lot of women who have Venus in Leo who enjoy being in management roles because they kind of like to lead the pack. They like to run the show in a way. There is a natural sense of hospitality, entertainment, and that's another avenue in which it can go because, you know, you're bringing people together and you're having a good time and you're really expressing yourself. So when you have Venus in Leo, some part of your life is going to express itself in that way. It doesn't have to be every part of your life, but there is a little part of you that's going to represent that. And currently, with Venus transiting in Leo, that energy is going to be stronger. Now remember, for those of you who don't have Venus in Leo, you have Leo in some part of your chart, and that energy is going to come alive for you in that part of your life. So if Venus is transiting your 7th house, for example, and you're an Aquarius rising, then in this time you might be attracting these kind of individuals into your life, that more vivacious energy, that more playful energy, those kind of more fun-loving clients, for example. However, from a Vedic perspective, Venus in Leo is a very different proposition. And while all of those things are true, what we've just talked about, the vivaciousness, the entertainment, the hospitable nature, what we also see is that if Venus represents the way that we want to be loved or that we perceive love, so not just Venus is love, but very specifically how we want to be loved, when it's in the sign of Leo, what happens is there is a tendency for people to feel like they need to be successful, or they need to do things either for themselves or for other people around them in order to be loved, because the doing things or the success are very Leo qualities. And so when you combine those two things, there's this idea that if I do enough, that I will be loved and recognized for that love. And the thing is that in today's society, we do get rewarded for that kind of behavior, largely because when we see celebrities, we are seeing that that kind of behavior actually results in something that is perceived as positive. But then, when we look more deeply into it, we see that this is a never-ending cycle, because doing more and more things will never result in the satisfaction or being satiated. And in fact, from a Vedic perspective, and I know in many traditions, the pinnacle of love is just being able to be accepted for who you are and not what you do. So being accepted for who you are as an individual in a receptive way, as opposed to what you do, which is a much more yang approach and a much more Leo approach. And so the main difference between Venus and Leo from a Western and Vedic perspective is that the Vedic angle is that this is actually a harmful place for Venus to be in, largely because it results in this unsatiated capacity for wanting to do things in order to feel loved. And currently, because Venus is in Leo, that energy, whether you have it in your chart or not, is going to be stronger. So we want to be mindful of our behavior in relationships at this time, because it can be influenced by this feeling that we need to do something in order to be loved. We need to be successful. We need to achieve Leo qualities in order to be loved. And I think this is a very profound message from the Vedic tradition, which doesn't get emphasized enough in the Western tradition, but I have seen it work extremely well, because no planet ever has only its good side or its bad side. And I'm not here to just trash Venus in Leo, absolutely not. Quite the opposite. There are actually two things here. One is that we want to recognize that there are two sides to every coin. So actually Venus in Leo is great for that artistic work, for the management, for the corralling people, for that energetic magnetism. But that we also want to recognize that it can be harmful if it's coming from the wrong place. And actually, this is also an opportunity for us to have empathy if we know that we have people with Venus and Leo in our lives, because that's the work that they are coming through. So one of the things here is that as we understand the deeper qualities of Venus and Leo, we're also creating greater empathy for the people with those placements, and also for ourselves if you have Venus in Leo. Secondly, no two Venus in Leos are equal, meaning that just because you have Venus in Leo or you know someone with it does not mean that they are all going to behave unanimously the same. And in fact, there are so many different ways to understand how this planet will play out. Where is it located? What other planets are with it? What's it aspecting? And then also, you have your main chart, but in the Vedic tradition, there are also these subcharts, these divisional charts. So you may behave more like Venus and Leo in your relationships, but you may behave in a very different way when it comes to your career or your money, for example. So we start to get very nuanced behaviors of what the Venus and Leo characteristic will play out as depending the area of life in our chart. So what I'm also trying to say is that there are two sides of the coin, and every Venus and Leo is going to behave differently. But the important thing is that it's not just about the magnetism and the wow factor and the vivaciousness. It's also about the deeper understanding of where does that come from. And you will find that people with Venus and Leo can tend to be a little bit more opinionated, or they'll have a sense that people sometimes associate them with being bossy. But now you understand that it has something to do with a deeper need to feel like, okay, if I do this and I succeed and I'm able to manage something, that I will also feel love. And hopefully this can create a greater sense of ease without feeling like, oh, Venus and Leo people are just bossy or dominating or opinionated. The other reason that I'm mentioning this is because it might surprise you who has Venus in Leo. We're most associating this with the celebrities that I listed, but there are also other people where you might be surprised. Oh, these people have Venus in Leo too. How does that show up in their life? Okay, so how about if you live with someone with Venus in Leo, your business partner has this placement, or a client that you work with frequently? There are 3 things to consider here. One is that Venus is only one part of the equation when it comes to understanding relationship compatibility. So you don't want to get too obsessed with Venus being the make or break planet with how that relationship is going to unfold. We look at many facets to understand the riches and the challenges of a particular relationship. And that leads me to my second point, which is that it builds a lot of empathy, knowing the motivation from which they understand love, that being needing to do something or feel successful in order to receive love. If you will have that kind of empathy, you're able to soften to the energy a little bit more. And that leads me to point 3, which is lean into it. Give them a little bit more praise. Offer them a little bit of support and recognition. If you don't have Venus in Leo and you don't fully understand that, that's okay. But you can trust that that's something that they may appreciate. Now, I'm not saying you have to go overboard. As part of the work is to detach from a need for that validation, but there's always going to be some little bit of default setting there, and it will be helpful. And on the flip side, people with Venus and Leo themselves, they enjoy romance, they're playful, they can be very generous with love and very hospitable. So there are many good things about being in a relationship with someone with Venus and Leo. And in addition to that, because we currently are going through the transit where Venus is in the sign of Leo until the 9th of July, the feeling is going to be accentuated, meaning that if somebody in your life has that placement, then they are going to exhibit those characteristics even more strongly right now. And, whether that's good or bad is up to you. And lastly, in terms of transits in the sky between the 13th of June to the 9th of July, while Venus is transiting Leo, there's a couple of things. One is that this week we're going to be feeling this effect much more strongly. So all of the qualities, the strengths and the challenges that I've described might be intensified. Secondly, we're going to feel the friction a little bit more around the 24th and the 25th of June, as well as around the 2nd and 3rd of July. So you want to be mindful about the more extreme behaviors of Venus in Leo at that time. On the flip side, during this entire period, you can lean into your vivaciousness, you can lean into your artistic pursuits and your desire to have a good time and to bring a bunch of friends together and express yourselves. This is an excellent time to do that. I would just say that now that you understand the nuances of what it means to have Venus in Leo, you want to be mindful of where some of the motivation comes from and tap into that a little bit more. So I hope this video has helped you understand what Venus in Leo actually means, that it can mean a lot of different things depending on the person, and also how you can best use this particular time in June and July.